They called my daughter the dumb kid of the divorce, loud enough for her to hear it, loud enough for me to hear it. The words hung in the air like a poison wrapping around my throat until I could barely breathe. I wanted to shout to defend her, to tear apart anyone who dared speak that way about my little girl, but I didn't. Instead, I stood frozen, hands clenched at my sides, fighting back the burn of tears. Lena was just 11 years old, and that day she carried her invention into the school gymnasium like it was a piece of her soul. Weeks of salvaging wires, testing circuits, scribbling diagrams in her notebook late at night had led to this moment. She had worked at our kitchen table, soldering pieces of copper and taping LED lights salvaged from broken flashlights, all with the stubborn belief that her idea mattered. She called it power in your step, a shoe that could generate energy from motion, lighting up a bulb with each step. She wore her big brother's old button-down shirt as a makeshift lab coat ironed the night before with trembling hands. She tried to look confident, but I knew her too well. I saw the way her eyes darted to the other projects: solar panels, elaborate models, polished displays that parents had clearly spent thousands on. Next to those, her cardboard trifold with painted letters looked small. But to me, it was the most beautiful thing in that room. When the judges passed by, barely glancing at her table, my heart broke. One smirked, another whispered to his colleague, and they both laughed. They didn't see her invention. They didn't see her effort. They didn't see her. And when one woman finally stopped long enough to speak, she called it cute. Just that. Cute. As if weeks of brilliance and resilience could be reduced to a word you'd use for a dog in a costume. I sat on the bleachers, fists balled so tight my nails dug crescents into my palms. Around us, other children presented their projects with proud parents recording every word. Laughter filled the air, cameras clicked, applause echoed. Lena's corner was silent, just her sitting straight-backed in front of her project, fighting not to crumble. Then came the whisper that sliced me open. "Isn't that the dumb kid of the divorce?" It came from a cluster of students walking by. My body jolted as if I'd been struck. Lena heard it too. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the way her hands tightened on the edge of the table. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, but I knew what was happening inside her. Piece by piece, they were trying to strip her down until she believed them. I wanted to scoop her up and run. I wanted to scream at the judges, at the parents, at every cruel child who thought mocking an 11-year-old was sport. But then I saw her stand a little taller when a boy wandered over, curious enough to ask what her project did. She showed him. She spoke softly, but she spoke. She pointed to the copper coils pressed on the panel and made the bulb glow. For a moment she was back in her element, curious, confident, creative. That was when it hit me. I couldn't save her from this. I couldn't fight every whisper or force every eye to see her worth. What I could do was believe in her so fiercely that nothing they said could tear it down. I crouched beside her table, placed a hand on her knee, and whispered, "I'm proud of you. No matter what they say, this matters." Her eyes met mine, glassy but steady, and she nodded once. Minutes passed. Kids began dismantling their projects, packing up glitter-covered volcanoes and solar models. Judges tallied scores, parents compared notes. Lena stayed. She stood at her booth as if her presence alone was a declaration: I am still here. I still matter. And then he walked in. At first I barely noticed him. A man in his early 60s, dressed in a navy blazer, clean-shaven, moving slowly down the rows of projects. He didn't wear a judge's badge. He didn't belong to the PTA crowd. He stopped briefly at a wind turbine project, nodded politely, then moved on. Then he reached Lena's table. He paused, looked at her sneaker with the pressure panel, tapped the bulb, asked a question I couldn't hear. Lena straightened her shoulders and began to explain. Her voice grew stronger as she demonstrated the circuit, her small hands moving with precision as she spoke of kinetic energy and recycled materials. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He leaned in, read her notebook, flipped through her diagrams with furrowed brows as though the scrawled notes of an 11-year-old contained something sacred. Then he looked at me. His eyes were sharp, serious, unwavering. He pointed at her project and said clearly, "This needs to be patented. The gym went still. Conversations faltered. Even the judges at the front table turned their heads. My heart slammed against my ribs. Lena froze, her mouth slightly open. The man introduced himself, Dr. Ethan Caldwell, professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. He explained that he had never seen a child apply engineering principles with such creativity and rigor, especially using salvaged parts. He handed Lena his card and told her she deserved guidance, mentorship, and protection for her idea. The same judges who had brushed her aside minutes earlier suddenly reappeared, asking to see the project again. The woman who had called it cute leaned closer, scribbling notes furiously. Parents crowded around, asking how long the light stayed on, where she had learned to build it, what else she planned to do. Lena answered each question calmly, with a quiet confidence that made my chest ache with pride. Kids who had mocked her earlier stood back silent, now watching as the spotlight shifted. In that moment, my daughter wasn't the dumb kid of the divorce. She was a young inventor standing on the edge of possibility. When the award ceremony ended, they gave her a small ribbon for innovation, an afterthought maybe, but it didn't matter. She had already won something: greater recognition, visibility, validation. That night back at home, Lena taped the ribbon to the refrigerator door. Then she went to her room, took apart her prototype, and began sketching improvements. She didn't bask in the praise, didn't gloat. She was already thinking about what came next. I sat at the kitchen table holding Dr. Caldwell's card, trembling with gratitude and relief. I thought about how close we had come to walking away, how close Lena had come to believing the whispers, how easily her spark could have been snuffed out. But she had stayed. She had believed in her project even when no one else did. And when the right person finally saw it, everything changed. My name is Kayla Martinez, and I'm Lena's mother. For 5 years, it's been just us, me working double shifts to keep the lights on, her tinkering with scraps and dreams bigger than our small town could hold. People judged us for who we weren't. But that day at the science fair, someone finally saw who Lena really was: a thinker, a builder, a problem solver. And that moment, it was just the beginning. When we got home that night, Lena stayed up until nearly midnight with her notebook spread across the floor. She had her colored pens out, wires coiled around her ankles, and scraps of cardboard scattered everywhere. She barely noticed me as she tinkered, her face illuminated by the small desk lamp we'd found at a thrift store. I watched her, my heart a strange mix of pride and fear. Pride because I knew this was her gift, her spark. Fear because I knew how cruel the world could be to anyone who dared to shine. I lay in bed later, unable to sleep, staring at the business card Dr. Caldwell had given us, a professor at MIT. It almost felt unreal. Someone of his stature had noticed my daughter's work. But then doubt crept in. What if it led nowhere? What if we were getting our hopes up too high? I'd seen Lena crushed before, and each time it took weeks to help her rebuild. I wasn't sure either of us could survive another blow that deep. The next morning, Lena padded into the kitchen in her oversized hoodie, her hair messy from sleep. She poured herself cereal and said casually, "Do you think he really meant it about the patent?" I set down my coffee. "I think he meant every word." Her eyes searched mine, hesitant. "Do you think I'm really smart enough?" My throat tightened. She didn't know how much it hurt to hear that question. How many nights I had wondered the same about myself when life pressed down too hard. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "You're not just smart enough, Lena. You're more than enough." That day, we emailed Dr. Caldwell. I expected a polite brush-off, maybe a quick note wishing her well. Instead, he responded within hours. He offered to video call us that evening. When he appeared on the screen, Lena's eyes widened. He smiled kindly, his voice warm but firm, as he asked her to explain her design again. She spoke nervously at first, fumbling with her diagrams, but he encouraged her to slow down, to take her time. He asked thoughtful questions, never once talking down to her. When she stumbled, he simply nodded and said, "That's a great start. Here's how we can build on it. Here's how we can..." By the end of the call, Lena was glowing. Dr. Caldwell told her that her idea was worth pursuing, and he offered to connect us with a colleague who specialized in patents for young inventors. He warned that the process would be long and sometimes discouraging, but he promised to guide her through it. After the call ended, Lena turned to me, her face lit with a joy I hadn't seen in months. Mom, he really thinks I can do this. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly. Of course you can. But as word spread through the school about Dr. Caldwell's interest, the backlash began. At first it was whispers. Parents who had once ignored us now eyed me suspiciously in the parking lot. One mother muttered to another, loud enough for me to hear, "It's always the ones who play the victim that get special treatment." At a PTA meeting, someone suggested we must have connections to have gotten that kind of attention. Others insisted Lena's project couldn't possibly be original, that she must have copied it from the internet. The cruelest rumor was that Dr. Caldwell had only praised her out of pity. I wanted to scream at them all to demand they stop tearing down an 11-year-old girl, but I bit my tongue. I knew Lena would face worse in her life if she pursued this path. What mattered wasn't silencing the gossip, it was helping her believe in herself enough to withstand it. Still, it hurt. Every sideways glance, every smirk, every whisper scraped at the raw edges of my own insecurities. As a single mother, I'd always felt judged, too poor, too young, too exhausted. Now they weren't just judging me, they were aiming their cruelty at my daughter. One afternoon, as I waited outside school, Lena climbed into the car with her shoulders slumped. Her notebook hung loosely in her hand. "They laughed at me again," she murmured. "They said I'm only getting help because I'm the divorce kid." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Lena, listen to me. You are not what they say you are. You are not the divorce kid. You are not broken. You are brilliant, and one day they'll wish they had treated you differently." She didn't answer, but I saw the flicker of resolve return to her eyes. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Caldwell kept his promise. He introduced us to a lawyer who specialized in patents for young inventors. The lawyer explained the process, the paperwork, the costs. My stomach sank when I heard the fees. It was more than I made in a month. After the call, I sat in the kitchen long after Lena had gone to bed, my head in my hands. How could I tell her we couldn't afford this? How could I crush her dream just as it was taking shape? But then I thought of the double shifts I'd worked, the nights I'd spent scrubbing floors or stocking shelves, the sacrifices I'd made just to keep the lights on. I had done all of that for her. I could do this too. I picked up my phone and texted my manager, "I'll take any extra hours you have." The weeks blurred into exhaustion. I worked early mornings and late nights, coming home with my back aching and my hands raw. Some nights Lena would wait up, her eyes heavy with worry, asking if I was okay. I always smiled and said yes, even when I wanted to collapse. Finally, after months of scraping and saving, we had enough to file the initial paperwork. When the lawyer confirmed the application had been submitted, Lena burst into tears and hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. "Mom," she whispered, "we really did it." I stroked her hair, holding her close. "Yes, baby, we did. But life has a way of testing every triumph." At the next science fair, Lena unveiled an improved version of her project, sleeker, sturdier, more efficient. She had spent every spare moment refining it. Her hands blistered from soldering her notebooks filled with equations. I watched her set it up with quiet confidence, no longer shrinking from the stares around her. This time, the room buzzed with curiosity. Judges lingered at her table. Kids whispered not insults but questions. For a moment I thought the tide had turned. But then Blake's mother, one of the loudest critics, stormed over. Her son's project, an expensive drone kit, had malfunctioned. Red-faced, she sneered at Lena's booth. "Everyone knows this is too advanced for a child. There's no way she built it on her own. Did your mother help you cheat?" The words sliced through the air. Gasps erupted around us. Lena's face paled, her lips trembling. I stepped forward, my pulse pounding, ready to defend her. But before I could, Lena raised her chin. "No," she said firmly. "I built this. I worked for it. And I don't need anyone to believe me to know it's true." The silence that followed was electric. For the first time, my little girl stood on her own against the cruelty. And in that moment, I knew she was stronger than I had ever realized. The silence after Lena's words was heavy, like a storm that had been cut short mid-thunder. Around us, parents and students stood frozen, staring at her with a mix of disbelief and something new, respect. My daughter, 11 years old, had faced down an accusation meant to humiliate her. And she hadn't faltered. But Blake's mother wasn't finished. Her eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with disdain. You expect us to believe that a child built something like this? You think you're smarter than all of us? Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply pressed down on the shoe's panel and the bulb glowed bright, unwavering. That light wasn't just electricity, it was defiance, proof truth. The judges stepped in quickly, ushering Blake's mother away and assuring us they would handle the situation. But the damage was done. Whispers spread again, this time not about Lena being the divorce kid or the broke one, but about whether her invention could really be her own. That night, after the fair ended, Lena sat quietly in the car, staring out the window. Her hands rested on her notebook, her knuckles pale from clutching it so tightly. Finally, she said softly, "Why do they hate me so much, Mom? Why can't they just be happy for me?" I wanted to tell her it was because she was different, because people fear what they don't understand, because envy can rot the best of people. But instead, I squeezed her hand and said, "Because they see your light, Lena, and it scares them. But don't you ever dim it." Weeks passed and things only grew more complicated. The patent lawyer called one evening to inform us that a larger company had filed a similar concept patent just weeks after ours. He explained that this was common, that big corporations often tried to edge out smaller inventors by overwhelming them with legal battles. My heart sank. I had heard horror stories of individuals bankrupted before they could even defend their ideas. I looked at Lena, who was listening intently, and I knew what I had to do: shield her from this, even if it crushed me. After the call, I tried to act calm. "It's just part of the process, honey. Don't worry about it." But she saw through me. "Mom," she said, her eyes sharp with a wisdom far beyond her years, "don't lie to me. I need to know what we're fighting." So I told her. About the big company, about the money they had, about how hard it would be to keep our place. She listened silently, then opened her notebook and began sketching. When I asked what she was doing, she replied simply, "Making it better. If they want to steal it, they'll have to chase me. And I'll already be ahead." My throat tightened with pride. She wasn't giving up. She was pushing forward. But the battle took its toll. The gossip at school escalated. Parents whispered that we were just seeking attention, that Lena's invention was too convenient, that it must be a hoax. Some of Lena's classmates stopped talking to her altogether, afraid of being targeted by association. One evening, she came home with her backpack half open, her papers torn, her diagrams smeared with ink. Someone had dumped water on her work. She dropped the bag on the floor and whispered, "I don't want to go back." I knelt beside her, lifting her chin. "Lena, they can ruin your papers, but they can't ruin your mind. Everything you've built is still in here." I tapped her forehead gently. "And they can't touch that." She didn't smile, but she nodded. And the next morning, she went back to school. Then, just when it felt like we couldn't take another hit, an unexpected twist unraveled everything I thought I knew. One Sunday afternoon, my ex-husband showed up at our door. We hadn't seen much of him since the divorce. Just scattered visits, broken promises, long stretches of silence. Lena adored him once, but over time she learned not to expect much. He stood there awkwardly, holding a newspaper in one hand. The front page showed a photograph of Lena at the science fair, standing proudly beside her project. The headline read, "Local Girl's Invention Sparks Patent Battle with Tech Giant." "She's amazing," he said quietly, his voice thick. "I didn't know." I crossed my arms, wary. "What do you want?" He looked down, shifting uneasily. I have connections. People in engineering law. I can help." My chest tightened. For years he had been absent. And now, suddenly, when the world recognized Lena, he appeared. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. But another part, the part that saw Lena's hopeful eyes peeking from the hallway, wondered if I could afford to refuse. We let him in. The weeks that followed were complicated. He began showing up more often, taking Lena to the park, helping her refine her sketches. She laughed with him in ways I hadn't seen in years. At night, though, I lay awake wondering if he was here for her or for the attention her invention brought. One evening, as Lena slept, he sat at our kitchen table sipping coffee. "Kayla," he said, "you have to let me help with the patent fight. This company will eat you alive if you try to face them alone." I stared at him, torn between anger and desperation. And why now? Why not when she was struggling at school? Why not when she cried herself to sleep, thinking no one believed in her? His face crumpled with guilt. Because I was a coward. I didn't know how to show up for her then, but I can now. I didn't trust him, but for Lena's sake I agreed. Together we fought back. With Dr. Caldwell's support, Lena's determination, and my ex-husband's contacts, we challenged the corporation. It was grueling months of paperwork, court hearings, endless nights of preparation. But we held our ground. Through it all, Lena never stopped inventing. She sketched constantly, her notebooks filling faster than I could buy them. She wasn't just clinging to one idea, she was building a future. And yet I could see the cracks forming. The weight of the fight, the bullying, the pressure, it all pressed down on her small shoulders. Some nights I heard her crying softly in her room, whispering to herself, "I can't mess this up. I can't let them win." Those words tore at me, because she wasn't just fighting for a patent. She was fighting for her identity, her worth, her place in a world that had tried to erase her. The day of the hearing arrived. We sat in a cold conference room. The corporation's lawyers in crisp suits lined up on the other side of the table. Lena sat between me and her father, her hands trembling but her eyes fierce. The lawyers argued that her idea was too simple, too obvious, that it wasn't patent-worthy. But then Lena stood. 11 years old, barely tall enough to see over the table, she presented her prototype. She explained the science, the iterations, the improvements she'd already sketched for future models. Her voice was steady, her words clear. And when she pressed down on the shoe and the bulb glowed, even the corporation's lawyers leaned forward. In that moment, I knew no matter the outcome, my daughter had already won. The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and polished wood, but to me, it reeked of intimidation. The corporation's lawyers shuffled their papers, their expensive pens gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Across from them sat my daughter, 11 years old, her feet barely touching the ground, clutching her prototype like it was a shield and a sword all at once. When she pressed the shoe and the bulb glowed, there was a beat of silence no one expected. Even their lead attorney, a woman in a charcoal suit with sharp eyes, paused. She leaned forward, tapped her pen against her pad, and asked, "And how many iterations did you build before reaching this model?" Lena straightened her shoulders. 5. Each time I changed the wiring to reduce resistance. This one gives the strongest current. The lawyer blinked. She hadn't expected that answer. None of them had. I watched the pride bloom on my ex-husband's face. The same man who had walked away years ago, now acting as though this moment bound him to her. It made my stomach twist. Where was he when she cried over torn notebooks, when she begged for someone to believe in her? Now that cameras and headlines circled, suddenly he was here. The hearing dragged on for hours. The corporation argued that kinetic energy shoes weren't a novel concept. Their lawyers pointed to old patents, to abandoned prototypes by adult inventors with deep funding. But Dr. Caldwell, who sat quietly behind us, finally spoke. "This isn't about the concept alone," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "It's about execution. This child not only built her own functional model but improved it through repeated testing using salvaged materials. That level of originality and application cannot be dismissed." The panel of examiners nodded, scribbling notes. I caught one of them glancing at Lena with a flicker of admiration. When it ended, the decision was deferred. We would have to wait weeks for the ruling. The wait nearly broke me. At night, I lay awake listening to Lena scribble in her notebook, whispering equations to herself. My ex-husband began visiting more, bringing her tools and books. She adored the attention, and though part of me was grateful, another part burned with unease. He was winning back her trust. But was it out of love or the glow of her growing fame? One evening after Lena had gone to bed, I overheard him on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, but I caught the words, "She's incredible leverage. We can pitch this. Investors will love it." My stomach dropped. Leverage? Investors? He wasn't here for her. He was here for the opportunity she represented. I wanted to confront him then and there, but the sight of Lena sleeping peacefully in her room stopped me. I couldn't shatter her fragile joy, not yet. The betrayal came sooner than I feared. At the next science showcase, a regional event sponsored by the state, Lena unveiled her improved prototype. Cameras flashed, reporters circled, and she explained her invention with a poise that stunned me. Parents who had once sneered now leaned in, eager to claim they knew her when. But as she finished her presentation, a man in a tailored suit strode onto the stage. He held up a slick brochure, one that bore my daughter's design polished and branded with a corporate logo. "We at Enertech are proud to announce our newest innovation," he declared, a kinetic shoe designed to harness energy with every step. The crowd murmured in confusion. My chest seized. I looked at the brochure, at the design lines identical to Lena's. They had stolen it. Lena froze, her face pale. "That's mine," she whispered. "Mom, that's mine." The man ignored her. My ex-husband, standing nearby, didn't move. His silence was deafening. It hit me then, he had sold them her idea. My knees went weak. Rage coursed through me, so fierce I thought I might explode. But before I could act, Lena stepped forward. "That's mine," she said, her voice shaking but clear enough to carry across the room. "I built that. I tested it. I improved it. You don't get to stand here and pretend it's yours." The crowd went still. Cameras swung toward her. Reporters scribbled furiously. The man in the suit faltered, stammering something about collaborative innovation. But Lena didn't stop. "You can copy my drawings," she said, her eyes blazing, "but you can't copy the nights I spent building it. You can't copy the bruises on my fingers from soldering wire. You can't copy my mind, and you can't silence me." The applause began softly, then swelled into a roar. Parents clapped, judges stood, even kids who had once mocked her cheered. The man in the suit turned red, muttered something about a miscommunication, and fled the stage. I stood, frozen, tears streaming down my cheeks. My daughter, my 11-year-old little girl, had just faced down an entire corporation and spoken her truth in front of everyone. That night, the betrayal by her father finally came to light. Lena confronted him directly, her small voice breaking but fierce. "Did you tell them?" He didn't deny it. He muttered excuses about needing money, about opportunities, about thinking of the future. But none of it mattered. "You were supposed to believe in me," Lena said, her face streaked with tears. "Not sell me." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Leave," she said. And for once I didn't stop her. He left our lives that night, and though the wound cut deep, it also freed us. The ruling on the patent arrived weeks later. We won. The corporation's attempt to claim her design failed, and Lena's name stood alone on the official documentation. She was recognized as the rightful inventor. The news spread quickly. Reporters called her a prodigy. Schools invited her to speak. Universities sent letters of interest even though she was years away from applying. But Lena didn't bask in the fame. She went right back to her desk, to her notebooks, to the joy of building. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mom, it hurt. Everything with Dad. But I don't want that to stop me. I don't want to be angry forever. I just want to keep creating." I brushed her hair back, kissing her forehead. "Then that's exactly what you'll do." From then on, whenever I looked at her hunched over her work, her brow furrowed in concentration, I didn't just see my daughter. I saw resilience. I saw brilliance. I saw a spirit unbroken by betrayal, unshaken by envy, unstoppable in the face of cruelty. And I realized something too. This wasn't just her story, it was mine. A single mother fighting for her child's right to be seen, a girl defying the world's attempts to erase her. Together we were rewriting what it meant to rise from the ashes of dismissal and betrayal. The weeks after the ruling felt surreal. One moment, Lena was a quiet 11-year-old who tinkered at our kitchen table with scraps and hope. The next, she was being invited to conferences, her name whispered in conversations between engineers and entrepreneurs. But inside our home, she remained the same. Her notebooks multiplied, her hands forever stained with ink and graphite. She still wore her brother's oversized button-down as a makeshift lab coat still tripped over the wires scattered across her bedroom floor. One night, I found her asleep at her desk, her head resting on an open page of equations. Beside her lay a list she had written in neat block letters, "Things I want to build one day." At the top was a simple line, "Something that helps people who feel invisible." My chest ached. That was my daughter, the girl who turned her pain into possibility, who transformed cruelty into creation. But not everyone celebrated her. At school, the bullying shifted. No longer was she mocked as the divorced kid or the broke one. Now the whispers carried a different sting. "She thinks she's better than us. She's only famous because of pity. It won't last." One afternoon, she came home and threw her backpack down with unusual force. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "why do they always hate me?" First it was because I wasn't enough, and now it's because I'm too much. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. Because Lena, people who haven't found their own light will always try to dim someone else's. But listen to me, your light is not theirs to control. It's yours. She sniffled, wiping her face, and whispered, "Then I'll just shine brighter." And I knew she meant it. Dr. Caldwell stayed by her side through it all. He visited often, bringing books and kits, challenging her with problems most adults couldn't solve. Each time Lena rose to the challenge, her confidence growing. He reminded her gently, invention isn't just about what you build, it's about who you become while building it. Slowly, I saw her become someone new. Not the girl crushed by whispers, not the child weighed down by divorce, but a young innovator with a fierce sense of self. And me, I learned to become someone new too. I had spent years bracing myself against judgment, carrying shame for choices and circumstances I couldn't change. But through Lena's eyes, I saw that survival was its own kind of invention. I had built a life out of scraps and determination, the same way she built her prototypes. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud too. The most powerful moment came months later at a National Youth Innovation Showcase. Lena was the youngest presenter in a hall filled with teenagers and college students. When she stepped onto that stage, her trifold board replaced with a sleek display, I thought my heart might burst. She stood there, small but steady voice strong as she explained kinetic energy circuits and possibility. The audience listened, not with condescension but with awe. When she finished, the applause thundered through the hall. As she walked off stage, a reporter asked her, "What would you say to other kids who feel like they don't belong, who are told they're not good enough?" Lena paused, looked straight into the camera and said, "I'd tell them the same thing I tell myself. You are not what they call you. You are what you create, what you dream, what you keep building even when no one believes in you." The words echoed through the crowd, and I felt tears blur my vision. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every child who had ever been mocked, dismissed, or ignored. At night, when the noise quieted and the world forgot its applause, Lena still returned to her desk, her lamp glowing, her pencils scratching across paper. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing possibility, and I realized watching her that her real invention wasn't the shoe or the patent or even the energy she harnessed. Her real invention was herself, resilient, defiant, brilliant. And that invention no one could steal. Looking back now, I see the arc of our story clearly. It began with whispers meant to break her, the dumb kid of the divorce, the broke one. It swelled with betrayal, the sting of her father's silence, the theft of her work by people who saw her as leverage instead of light. But it climaxed with her standing tall, pressing her small shoe to the ground, lighting a bulb in defiance of every doubt. That glow wasn't just electricity, it was proof. Proof that she mattered. Proof that no cruelty could erase her brilliance. Proof that even a child dismissed and mocked could stand against giants and win. And for me, it was proof that love, unconditional, stubborn love, could be enough to carry us through every storm. If you are still here listening to our story, I want to say thank you. Because this story isn't just ours, it belongs to every person who has ever felt invisible at the table, who has been laughed at, dismissed, or told they weren't enough. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to fight to be seen, know this: you are more powerful than they realize. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in shouting back, it's in shining so brightly that they can't ignore you anymore. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe for more stories like this. And most importantly, leave a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me how you've turned your pain into power. Because your voice deserves to be heard too. Thank you for listening.